Imagine a time when the American dream arrived not in a digital box on your Porsche, but in a thick, 3-pound paper volume known as the Book of Wishes. For over a century, Sears, Roebuck & Co. was more than just a store. It was the logistical nervous system of a growing nation, an industrial titan that held a near monopoly on the American lifestyle. But today, the massive headquarters in Hoffman Estates stands as a tomb of corporate hubris, and the iconic Sears towers that once anchored every suburban mall have become hollowed-out shells, monuments to a $100 billion empire that simply forgot how to exist in the future. This is not just a story of a retailer that went bankrupt. It is a clinical investigation into how the world's most sophisticated logistics machine was systematically dismantled by a new breed of financial predator, leaving a trail of broken promises and evaporated retirements in its wake. The DNA of this tragedy began in 1888 with Richard Sears, a man who understood the power of the invisible store long before Bezos was born. Sears didn't just sell watches, he sold a revolution to rural America, a demographic that had been at the mercy of local general stores and their predatory pricing. By creating a mail-order catalog that offered everything from sewing machines to entire prefabricated houses, Sears effectively invented the everything before the internet, leveraging the expansion of the American railroad to create a distribution network that was technically unmatched in the late 19th century. This was the birth of the everything for everyone model, a promise of quality and satisfaction guaranteed that built a level of brand loyalty rarely seen in human history, transforming a simple mail-order business into the anchor of the American middle class. To understand the technical mastery of Sears at its peak, one must look at the logistics of the early 20th century. While competitors were struggling with local inventory, Sears was operating a massive 9-story distribution center in Chicago that functioned like a biological heart, pumping millions of products across the continent with clinical precision. This was the big box before the term existed, a system where the catalog acted as the interface and the railroad acted as the fiber optic cable of its day. The company's ability to standardize quality across thousands of product lines, from Kenmore appliances to Craftsman tools, created a closed ecosystem where a family could live their entire lives within the Sears brand. This technical superiority created a God complex in the mahogany boardrooms of Chicago, where executives began to believe that the American consumer would never and could not ever shop anywhere else. The first sign of the terminal illness that would eventually kill Sears appeared not in the sales charts, but in the shift of the American landscape. As the nation moved from rural farms to paved suburbs, Sears successfully pivoted by becoming the anchor tenant of the new shopping mall phenomenon. For decades, this move was seen as a masterstroke, as Sears became the physical heart of suburban social life. However, this success hid a structural vulnerability. Sears had tethered its entire identity to the physical mall, a 20th century technology that was beginning to rot from the inside out. By the time the internet began to replace the mall as the primary site of discovery, the men at the top were so blinded by their real estate holdings that they failed to see that their legendary catalog was actually the perfect blueprint for the digital revolution they were about to ignore. The smoking gun of Sears' suicide was the 2005 merger with Kmart, orchestrated by a hedge fund billionaire named Eddie Lampert. To the outside world, It looked like a consolidation of two retail giants. In reality, it was a high-stakes experiment in financial engineering that would prove fatal. Lampert, often compared to a Wall Street wizard, didn't see Sears as a place to buy tools or clothes. He saw it as a massive pile of undervalued real estate assets. Under his leadership, Sears began a radical decentralization where different departments were forced to compete with each other for resources as if they were separate companies. This clinical, cold-blooded approach to management effectively lobotomized the brand as internal divisions fought over marketing budgets while the stores themselves were left to crumble into a state of visible, embarrassing decay. Financially, Sears became a victim of a process known as asset stripping. Instead of investing the company's profits into modernizing its ancient e-commerce platform or renovating its dilapidated stores, billions of dollars were funneled into massive stock buybacks designed to prop up the share price for hedge fund investors. This was a vampire business model, bleeding the core retail business dry to feed the financial interests of the few. Iconic brands like Craftsman and Die Hard, which had taken a century to build, were sold off to generate quick cash, effectively selling the family silver to pay the mortgage on a burning house. For the executives, the metric of success was no longer the customer experience, but the clinical efficiency with which they could liquidate the empire's legacy. By the mid-2010s, the human cost of this neglect became impossible to ignore. Walking into a Sears store during this era was like entering a cemeteries of Prateleras vazias, a landscape of flickering fluorescent lights, stained carpets, and a haunting absence of both staff and customers. The Sears moment had become one of depression rather than aspiration. The company that had once employed hundreds of thousands of Americans, providing a stable gold watch retirement for generations, was now slashing jobs by the thousands every quarter. The psychological impact on the American worker was profound. Sears was the last brand that was supposed to fail, a symbol of industrial permanence that was being erased by a spreadsheet in a Greenwich, Connecticut office. The technical failure of Sears to compete with Amazon is one of history's greatest ironies. Sears had the data, the customers, and the logistics network to dominate the internet. They had been doing delivery to your door for 100 years. But while Jeff Bezos was building a culture of relentless customer obsession, Sears was trapped in a culture of clinical cost-cutting. They viewed their online presence not as the future, but as a low-margin threat to their high-overhead physical stores. They were trapped in the innovator's dilemma, where their previous success in real estate made them allergic to the very technology that was destined to replace it. By the time they tried to launch a serious digital strategy, the ground had already moved beneath them, and the Book of Wishes had been replaced by the one-click button. The early 2010s saw a frantic, desperate attempt to pivot toward a membership model called Shop Your Way, a data-driven loyalty program that Lampert believed would save the company. But it was too little, too late. The program was complicated, the stores were depressing, and the brand's reputation was in freefall. Sears was no longer the place where you went to buy your first refrigerator. It was the place you went because there were no other options, or because you were looking for a liquidation sale. The financial reports became a monthly litany of billion-dollar losses, a slow-motion car crash that the board of directors watched with a strange clinical detachment, convinced that their real estate strategy would eventually provide a soft landing that never came. The end came in October 2018 with a 2 a.m. bankruptcy filing that marked the official death of a 132-year-old icon. The filing revealed a staggering $11 billion in debt and a workforce that had been decimated from a peak of 350,000 to less than 70,000. For many Americans over 50, the news was a personal blow. It was the final confirmation that the era of industrial stability was over. The bankruptcy wiped out the savings of thousands of small investors and put the pensions of lifelong employees at risk, a final indignity for a workforce that had given their lives to a company they thought would always be there to catch them. In a final, bitter twist of fate, the liquidation process itself became a site of controversy. As stores were shuttered across the country, Eddie Lampert's own hedge fund, ESL Investments, emerged as the buyer for the remaining assets, in a deal that many critics viewed as the ultimate corporate maneuver. The blue bloods of the retail world had been replaced by a sacrificial lamb strategy, where the company's remains were picked over by the very people who had overseen its decline. This clinical dissection of a brand was a warning to the modern investor. A company's history and its emotional connection to the public mean nothing when faced with the cold, mathematical hunger of a distressed asset play. The technical autopsy of Sears highlights a fundamental truth about the digital age. A brand is not its buildings, but its utility. Sears thought they were in the real estate business, but they were actually in the trust business. When they stopped maintaining their stores and started selling off their best brands, they broke the invisible contract they had with the American people. This misalignment meant that every marketing campaign felt hollow, and every shop your way point felt like a bribe to enter a dying world. They were a 19th century general trying to fight a 21st century war with a 20th century supply line. One of the chilling aspects of the Sears story is the ghost store effect. Across the Rust Belt and the sun-drenched suburbs of Florida alike, hundreds of Sears locations now sit empty, their iconic signs removed, leaving only a faint rectangular stain on the brickwork. These retail ruins serve as a monument to the cost of corporate arrogance. For the towns that relied on Sears as a primary employer and taxpayer, the collapse was a local catastrophe, a hole in the community that no discount warehouse could truly fill. The American industrial dream that Richard Sears helped build had been replaced by a landscape of weeds and cracked asphalt. The bankruptcy of 2018 didn't just kill a company, it erased a culture. For generations, the Sears catalog was the way children learned to dream and the way families measured their progress. The emotional impact of losing that anchor is difficult to quantify in a spreadsheet, but it is felt in the silence of the malls that once buzzed with the energy of 1,000 Sears moments. The site of the Sears Tower, once a beacon of American economic might, being renamed after an insurance company, is a powerful image of how quickly a legacy can be overwritten when it fails to evolve. Today, Sears exists as a phantom brand, a handful of surviving stores, and a website that feels like a digital ghost town. There is a certain poetic tragedy in the fact that the very catalog model they invented is now the dominant form of global commerce, but under a different name. The $100 billion giant that once held the keys to the American home is gone, replaced by a logo that appears on budget appliances in a few remaining corners of the country. It is a ghost of a brand that once meant security, quality, and the future. The lesson for the modern investor and the student of history is clear. No empire is too big to fail if it stops investing in its own soul. Sears' failure was not a lack of resources, but a lack of imagination. They could see the digital world coming. They were the original pioneers of remote shopping, but they couldn't imagine themselves in it without the weight of their physical past. They were victims of a narrow definition of their own purpose. They thought they were a department store when they were actually a logistics company that lost its way. As we look at the empty parking lots where we once went to buy our first set of tools or a new refrigerator for a growing family, we are reminded of a time when companies felt like part of the community. That nostalgia is powerful, but it is also a warning. The same forces of financial engineering and digital disruption that erased Sears are currently working on the giants of today. The question is, which of today's retail titans is currently ignoring the rot in their own foundation because they are too busy propping up their stock price? The legacy of Richard Sears still lingers in the way we shop today, but the industrial engine he created has stalled forever. The suburban landscapes of America have had to reinvent themselves without their primary anchor, a painful process of transition that has left many communities behind. The empty loading docks and the silent escalators serve as a monument to the fact that in the world of high-stakes business, the only thing more dangerous than a powerful competitor is a leadership team that believes its own myths of invincibility. In the final analysis, Sears didn't just lose a market war. It lost its identity. The blue logo still hangs on a few buildings, but the world it anchored has changed forever. The Sears story is the ultimate American industrial tragedy. A company that taught the world how to shop, but forgot how to keep its own customers dreaming. It remains a $100 billion reminder that if you don't feed your business, it will eventually start eating itself. As the final lights go out in the remaining Sears anchors, we are left with a clinical reality. Ego and debt are the two most powerful forces of gravity in the corporate world. No matter how high you build your tower or how deep your roots go into the American soil, if you stop providing value to the person holding the catalog, the horizon you once dominated will eventually become your graveyard. The Sears moment hasn't just ended, it has been archived as a cautionary tale of what happens when a legend stops listening to the heartbeat of the people it was built to serve.